Nice to welcome back everybody. If you've got your fill of cupcakes and brownies, we should have passed them around and left them in the rooms. I'm going to start the next session. I generally disapprove of people who get into conferences and events just for their bit and then leave. So today I disapprove of myself. It's been one of those days, one of those weeks really. But I'm delighted I have been able to come for this session. So in case you don't know, I'm Alan Finlayson, I'm Professor in Politics Department, so I'm here for the politics bit. I'm delighted to be certainly for my friends and colleagues from Poland and Exeter, Germany. So this session is called Area, Region and Local. So there is a bit of an IR-ish flavour to some of this, but I think it's picking up in different ways on some of the topics and themes that I saw going on in the session. So we're going to go in order of the programme. I'm going to go over a strict 15 minutes. I'll give you a 2-minute warning, so we've got time for questions and discussion afterwards. We have 2 panelists in the room and 2 people online, and I'm confident that the technology will not cause any problems. And you get a sense of how reckless I am. I want to welcome our 4 colleagues. We have Jakub from Warsaw University, who's going to talk about the evolution of the region as a concept in international relations. We're going to hear from Saroj online, also at Warsaw University, who's going to talk about colonialism, post-colonialism in Central Asia. Then we're going to come to DeWaal from the University of Exeter, who's going to talk about local place attachments with a focus on Germany. And then lastly online, we have Sofia from Leibniz Institute, who's going to talk about the post-Soviet space. So different ways in which places, regions, relatives are conceptualized and how that affects understanding. But please begin by welcoming Jakub.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm so happy to be here. It is my first time here at this university, so great thanks for invitation, and I hope it is just beginning of our close cooperation between our university, our faculty, and your faculty. I'm from University of Warsaw, and I focus in my research on area studies. Area studies as a subdiscipline of IR. And it is my main research area, and I focus especially on Asia, IR in Asia Pacific, Indo-Pacific, and in 15 minutes, I will try to trace the evolution of the concept of region in IR. So when we talk about region, area in IR, in international politics, it is quite obvious that area region was always. It is nothing new because it was always an area of cooperation and of course competition between states and the different units in the history of the world. But in my opinion, till the 50s, the region, the concept of region was not conceptualized in IR. It was a little neglected. We couldn't find, because if we come back to the 19th century, beginning of 20th century, we have a lot of papers, books, Mackinder, Haushofer, all of them, they try to explain competition between the powers, global powers, but it was not so many sources, places where we could find the term, the concept of region. What is it? And the beginning of the conceptualization process of the region in IR was at the beginning of the 50s. And when we talk about the concept of region, the concept of the region in IR is a function of these 3 elements: evolution of area and global studies as a subdiscipline in IR. It is the first factor. The second factor, the evolution of the concept of regionalism and the increase its role in IR, not only in theoretical perspective. It is many books, papers focusing on this, but also, of course, the increase the role of regionalism after the end of the call in reality, in practice. And the last but not least, connected with these two previous factors, it's of course transformation of global order, and the increase the role of region in IR. So to understand the concept of region in IR, we should take into account all these three factors. And the concept of region, and it is my main hypothesis, the concept of region, and is now the key term in area and global studies understood as a subdiscipline of IR. Why underline this, the keyword subdiscipline? Because also in Poland, it's a huge debate about the status of area studies, how we should define area studies. It is maybe we'll have time later, but it is from one side Oriental studies, language, cultural studies, from other side area studies has been developed in Poland in the last 20, 30 years as a subdiscipline in IR. We have a lot of research which are conducted by IR scholars in the context of Latin America, Indo-Pacific, and that's why I underline this. So my hypothesis is that in the last 100 years, because the beginning of IR was in as a IR theory, as a school, as a discipline, as a scientific discipline, was in 1919. So in the last 100 years, we could see the evolution of the concept of region in IR, shifting from pure geographical, geopolitical term and idea to a key concept in IR based on the ontological and epistemological arguments. So, for example, what is one of the arguments? You could find very useful IR theories. Realism, no-realism, liberalism could be very useful tools to explain region, interaction in the region, also in the context of regionalism. So it is the first hypothesis. The second hypothesis, the concept of a region in the last 50 years, especially after the Second World War, has shifted from the very static to dynamic, from passive to active, and from geographical to social construct. So referring to the title of the conference, we could say that we could see the shifting from the geographical to more immediate communities, cognitive regions. For example, if we take the concept of the Indo-Pacific, now it is a lot of papers, books about Indo-Pacific. It's not geographical concept. It is more connected with security, great power politics, with the also economic interdependence. So it depends more on not only on material but also non-material factors. But last but not least, very important argument. Despite of the evolution of the concept of region in last 50, 20, 30 years, very important because it's, again, it is a topic of the discourse, academic discourse, a key player, key actor is still states and big powers. They are the most important. Despite more and more important role is played by non-state actors, economic interdependence, states and powers are key actors. So very briefly, my arguments, I will not go in details, but we could see four phases of evolution of area and global studies in IR in the last 100 years. And the first period between 1919 and 1950, we could say that the concept we didn't have in this period the concept of region in IR. The region was mostly analyzed in the context of international law. We could find, of course, some reference in the Nations League Pact. They talk about regional organization. We could find about some information about regional organization in UN Charter, but region was not a key term. It was a little neglected in this discourse. The second phase, very important in the context of area and global studies as a subdiscipline of IR. So it is the period from the 50s till the end of the Cold War. And in this context, we could, of course, identify several key elements in this period. First of all, of course, European integration. And it was a huge debate among scholars how to define integration, what does it mean region, and that's all. It is one thing. The second thing, of course, it was a discussion, especially in the United States, when was the beginning of area studies in the United States, 43, 44, 45. But in this time, scholars in the United States use area studies very instrumentally. It was, of course, instrument of security and foreign policy of United States. And mostly, if you look at the documents adapted in the United States, they put stress not so much on the concept of region as a political. It was not so clear what does it mean area studies and what does it mean region. And I would encourage you to the paper of Hans Morgenthau, the father of realism, neorealism, who wrote a paper about IR and area studies in 52 in the Bulletin of Social Science. And it was a discourse how to treat area studies, how to treat region. Of course, one positive element, very important, is in this time we had the beginning of a subsystem approach, because such scholars like Zartman, William Thomson, Brecher started to understand one thing. If we want to analyze region and regionalism outside Europe, we couldn't use the concept and the models which refer to European integration. So it was a whole of series of papers devoted, let's say, to South Asia as a subsystem region. Brecher, Michael Brecher. Zartman focused on sub-Saharan Africa as a subsystem. William Thomson focused on the Middle East. But what was the problem? Please look at the name, subsystem approach. So what was the still dominant? The dominant was still global politics system. Global bipolar system de facto limited the whole discussion in the context of the region. So it was the beginning. We could say that in this time we have some kind of ground for the concept of region, but the region was perceived more in the static way, more in the very state-centric perspective. And we have the third period after the Cold War till 2000, when we have the beginning of new concept of regionalism, new regionalism, Björn Hettner, who put stress on non-state actors and who underline new regionalism, but this new regionalism was perceived more in the context of international political economy. Why? Because they put stress on such a term like, okay, we should include the states. States are not so important. Non-state actors, interdependence, economic interdependence, it is the most important. And of course, since the end of the Cold War, we had two groups of scholars. Some of the scholars focus more on traditional subsystem approach, very state-centric, and the second group of scholars is who follow more Bernhard approach. But everything has changed after 2009, 2014, and especially 2022. So the thing is that it is the best evidence that still states are the key actors, not only in IR, but also in the context of regionalism. Who could be creator? Who could be inventor of a region? Only states, big powers. If we take into account Indo-Pacific, it is the best example. Can you find on the map Indo-Pacific? No. What is in the Indo-Pacific? It was the political decision of such countries like United States, like India, like Australia, more in the context of China, to give some alternative for China. So to conclude, despite the different approaches to region by IR scholars today, we have two schools. I think it is a consensus among scholars that now the term the region could be treated as a main concept in area and the global studies as a subdiscipline of IR. And very important, despite some differences, especially in the last 5-10 years, also scholars who focus more on new regionalism accept one thing: still proximity matters. Still proximity matters, especially in the context of security. In the context of security, still proximity qualifies the security dilemma dramatically. It is the first, and the second thing, it is consensus. It is more and more independence between region, states, and the global system, because during the Cold War, we could say that this concept of region was a little artificial, because de facto only great powers, states, and we have a global system. It was not so clear role for the region. Thank you very much, and I'm ready for any comments and questions. Thank you.
Reminder that proximity matters. Not everyone who runs the UK has remembered that proximity might matter in many respects. So now, if we find Saroj, so I think do I pin him around spotlight? Which is it to make him show up in the screen? But no, I won't do that. Are you ready to go, Saroj? Do you have your?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Put that up.
Your screen. Windows. There. So my presentation is visible to you?
Yes, it is.
All right.
You want to make it full screen on yours if you press that little button there, and you'll see it better here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you so much. Just to be clear, I have like 12 minutes or so.
15 minutes. I'll give you a 2-minute warning.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. So good almost evening, everyone. So hello from Warsaw. For some technical reason, I couldn't be there. But thank you so much for allowing me to do this presentation online. So today I'm going to particularly talk about how we can study South Asia from an area studies perspective with the colonialism and post-colonialism as some sort of anchor point on how we can understand the region. So before jumping into what sort of things that I'm going to talk, let me give you a brief overview on what South Asia is. Professor Zajaczkowski just slightly touched on subsystem Within that subsystem, what the previous authors or mostly Western academia have tried to do is to redefine South Asia as a some sort of subcontinent, not as a continent or a separate region, but a subsystem or a subcontinent within the larger thing. And in a classical understanding of area studies, it's defined in two ways. In modern days, it's like neo-regionalism or a constructed concept of area studies. But in a classical term, whether the geographically it's proximate or not, or culturally it's together or not, it fits with South Asia. It's a geographical as well as cultural region. In a colonial construct, the South Asia have 7 states. In a political construct, it has 8 states. In a colonial construct, it had 7 states because it didn't have Afghanistan in it. And in a political concept, like we have a South Asian regional organization, which have 8 member states, including Afghanistan. The region borders with East Asia to the northeast. It borders Central Asia to northwest, if we count Afghanistan as a integral part of South Asia. And then West Asia to the west, Southeast Asia to the east, the Himalayas or a Karakoram Pass on the northern border, and the Indian Ocean in a larger part of southern part of South Asia. So the idea of my argument, this is of course based on the work that I have been doing. I'll try to wrap up in my final slide what I was talking about. The idea is if someone wants to study South Asia as a region, that one has to be very strong grasp on what colonialism is and what happened after the colonial phase, in a post-colonial phase. Only that, after that, one can understand what area studies or a South Asia is in a that term. So what colonialism does in international relations is it gives a perfect anchoring point for us to understand formation of modern state system as well as the regional system. And South Asia fits completely within that. That South Asia is the demarcation of South Asia was done by, in a larger aspect, was done by British. The fortification of South Asia was done by the Britain. And that then it also tells us the aspect or the back end story of the imbalance in the distribution of power, not only in the power structure between the state, but also within a state, like the class system, the unequal distribution of power within the population of each territory. And it also tells us the background of the economic dependency, for instance, that the resource excavation and like sending back the produce good in a higher prices, those sort of things that was created by the colonialism. And in terms of post-colonialism and international relations, that provides the critical lens to understand the contemporary international relations, because it criticizes the Eurocentrism, and it also criticizes the power, the correlations between power and knowledge. It also provides framework or anchoring point for the subaltern perspective. It also provides the framework for the global south. And then it also provides us the framework, some sort of framework for the decolonial alternatives. So in terms of colonialism, post-colonialism, and area studies as a one component, colonialism provides the fundamentals to understand the construction of region. Likewise, post-colonialism challenged area studies to be more critical of its sources and methodologies, like not in a very old colonial period where it was simple, like there was a colonizer who colonized a particular region for the resource excavation, this and that. It was not that simple. So post-colonialism challenged that idea and make us be more critical on that aspect. And area studies can provide, let's say, rich case studies for post-colonial theory and vice versa with each other. So talking about colonialism in South Asia, in a societal aspect, it will allow us to completely understand economic exploitation, deindustrialization, or some sort of cash crops cultivation that still is hunting subcontinent for in a larger aspect. And in a regional aspect, it talks about the bordering South Asian subcontinent. It talks about the border, which I recently wrote a paper on. It also talks about the construction of identity as a separate South Asian people. In terms of post-colonialism and South Asia, it talks about the independence, challenges, association with nation building, regional security complexities. Of course, Buzan and Weavier also wrote a chapter on South Asia about regional security complexities. It also talks about the elitism, feudalism, and unequal distribution of resources within the region. So having said that, for instance, the biggest country in subcontinent, India, is still somehow going through the big challenges associated with this elitism and feudalism. So like I said, this is how post-colonial or colonialism allow me to study South Asia or area studies in a better way. Is I published a paper with one of my colleagues on the trajectory between territorial disputes, nationalism and geopolitics, a case study of Kalapani border dispute between India and Nepal. So this was published in Geopolitics. So this paper talks particularly about how the confluence between territorial dispute, nationalism, and geopolitics is working out and how this was constructed by colonialism. So that's one thing. One of my another paper just recently published in the International Spectator, where me and my colleague have tried to do an assessment of three major border lines drawn by Britain: McMahon Line, Radcliffe Line, and Durand Line, which is between China, India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, and how these three colonial construction, which was done almost 200 plus years ago, it still drives the regional security complexities of South Asia. In the sense of classical geopolitics, it allows us to do such things if we have a strong grasp on colonialism and post-colonialism. And then in terms of polarity or multipolarity and changing distribution of power, let's say very classic power structure conceptual idea in international relations, it allows us to understand regional power of global South and their dilemma between regional and global order, or case study of Indonesia and India. So when we talk about the distribution of power, for instance, India and US is cooperating perfectly in Indo-Pacific. They agree with everything. They do a joint military operation. They do a joint patrol in Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean. But at the same time, when US is being more closer to the states from South Asia, India is very picky about it. They are not happy about it. So these also allow us to understand why India is very picky about it, why India think it's their region. So the construction of the idea of colonialism and post-colonialism also allow us to understand the multipolarity or changing distribution of power within the certain area. And in terms of other aspects such as strategic culture, one of my colleagues and myself wrote a paper on cause and effect, the factors that makes Pakistan's military a political force. While we were researching for this paper, we came to know that why the departure point of India and Pakistan was same day. They were independent on August 1947. And despite being the same departure point, India chose to be more democratic, very Gandhi and very idealistic state. At the same time, Pakistan chose to be very militarized, military state. So we went back and tried to trace why it's happening. And the reason behind that was during the colonial time, all of the regiments, all of the platoons that Britain have was on the Pakistan side of the land. So when they made a separate state, they inherited that strategic culture as some sort of security state or some sort of like a force state. So that still is a very big thing in Pakistan's strategic culture. And similarly, me and my friend is working on post-independent strategic culture of Pakistan, deconstructing the colonial influence on strategic thinking of Pakistan. This is a forthcoming book with Routledge. Here also we try to deconstruct so many ideas that still were carried by Pakistan from the colonial period. So that's all that I have to say, because I would love to hear from you after all the presentations are done.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you. So we'll go back to offline, at least those of us who are in the room. And we're going to turn now to some different level. We've had big levels, and now we're going to look specifically at Germany. So please welcome Germany.
All right, thank you so much. And my paper today, I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, but my paper is entitled The Contested Politics of Local Place Attachment, Examples from Post-War West German Heimat Debates. And this is from the subject of my book, which is hopefully forthcoming in the next few months. I'm sort of waiting for to see when it's in print with Cambridge on the topic of home and democracy in post-war West Germany, or more precisely the German term Heimat. Some of you may have heard Heimat, some of you may have never heard of the term, but I'll be talking about that a lot, and I'll say a little bit more about how it relates to the term home. So I have a lot of specific findings related to the case of Germany, but I'm going to try and relate this to the politics of place attachment more broadly to give it sort of a broader frame. But before I get into the specific subject matter of this concept of home and Heimat in post-war West Germany and the politics of it, I want to say a few overarching things about how do I approach this German concept for home, which is Heimat, and the question of place attachment. And unlike the English term for home, the German term Heimat doesn't refer to the local abode, sort of the home in a physical sense. It refers more to a local and regional place and can be expanded beyond it. It also has an emotional intensity. Home also does too, though. So on the one hand, it is true that this term Heimat has been influenced by unique histories within Central Europe. You think particularly regional fragmentation. It's not a surprise that in a landscape of regional fragmentation, historically, region becomes a major reference for home. And many Germans have said in certain periods, it differs, that Heimat can't be translated, right? At the same time, I think this argument that Heimat is bizarrely German has some problems. If you look for terms for home and local place attachment in different languages, they deviate, scales, associations. So we don't have, as many posit in German, this universal standard, and German is over here, right? So we have a lot of, so that's kind of how I approach this concept. I have kind of a middle path where, yes, it's influenced by unique histories and cultural understandings of home in German-speaking Europe. On the other hand, I argue it's connected to the bigger topic, which is what the anthropologist Michael Rappaport has called the universal capacity for humans to create a place of home. So these are interlinked. So speaking of this Heimat concept as something that is broadly about the phenomenon of place attachments and the functions that these place attachments serve. And this is a unique way of looking at it, because again, Heimat is often ascribed this unique function. But if you take the discourses, and it's a very big discourse, popular discourse in Germany historically up until the present on this concept of home, Heimat, and you compare it to the scholarship on place attachment, it's remarkable how much they overlap. In both of these discourses, you find descriptions of Heimat or place attachment as orientation in familiar places. They offer a sense of security. They're landscapes of personal biography and memory, right? If you think about places you experience being instilled with memory, often in a sense of personal biography invested in those places. I think most important for me throughout, I think across the board is the function of these local places as sort of baskets of social relationships. You have friendships, you have meaningful human connections with people, your ability to live in a certain place allows you to keep them intact, right? You're not moved all over the globe and detached from those social relationships. So as one expellee put it, a German expellee, he said, Heimat is local places of familiarity and landscapes and all those things, but it's first and foremost people. So to lose Heimat is to lose people amongst whom you live your everyday life, right? And that's the same with place attachment. And key in both of these discourses is reference to how loss of Heimat, loss of home, loss of place attachment is what brings preoccupation with it to the fore. It's what makes you focus on it, right? So they often say people write about Heimat when they lose Heimat. The scholarship on place attachment says the same thing, that place attachment often comes to the level of consciousness when it's disrupted, when it's lost. So we have a lot of powerful forces going on here, a big bundle of forces that place attachment serves. So how does that relate to politics? What are their political potentials? And there's some pretty big overarching questions. Does promoting democracy and pluralism require engaging with desires for local attachments, home and Heimat, or does it mean rejecting and transcending them? Does fostering democracy and pluralism mean rejecting historically rooted identities? Some like Doreen Massey have argued that they're almost inherently anti-democratic and exclusionary, or should we engage with them to make them more democratic and inclusive? Should compulsion to be mobile be celebrated as a form of mixing, increasing diversity, or is there also a side where it creates trauma and we should protect people who are forced or compelled to leave their place of home and attachment? So hovering above all this is essentially engagement with these forces, channeling these forces, or are they inherently regressive and we need to overcome them? Are they the basis of a problematic spatial worldview? And in the German debate on Heimat, and this has a long history, but there's a big contemporary debate, there's almost an intense interscene battle on the political left about, do you engage with Heimat? Do you not engage with Heimat? This is a longer debate, but it's really been intensified. So over the past decade, you've had a lot of left-wing intellectuals and left-wing politicians saying you need to engage with Heimat. It's essential, and you have to use this to counter its abuse in right-wing politics, right? You can imagine far right-wing groups saying immigrants, for example, are a threat to Heimat. What engagists from the left argue is that, well, look, immigrants themselves want a place of home. They have a deep homing desire. They want a place of Heimat. So it's not about transcending Heimat. It's about engaging. So we have this engagist group. On the other, we have a group arguing for rejecting Heimat. So as one activist, I thought it was a bit ironic because he's lived his whole life in the city of Hamburg and never seems to have been uprooted in his life, says that Heimat is inherently regressive and even fascist. Those who use the word Heimat should not be allowed to be considered a member of the political left. Left-wing utopia, and this is a quote, left-wing utopia is to be found in uprootedness. Within these contemporary debates, there have been a lot of myths about this concept's history. And one of the biggest ones that my book takes on is that Heimat was a taboo topic through most of post-war German history because of its use in National Socialism. The National Socialists, of course, engaged with this concept, particularly because you have to attach local energies to the war effort. It's a danger if local energies and sentiments become detached from that war effort. But this was riddled with ambiguity. Any kind of thought about Heimat that was detached from the political goals of the regime, wasn't dedicated to war effort, was, say, about abandoning the war and wanting to go back home. These came in for strong denunciation. Another myth that has proliferated throughout these popular discourses is the idea that the left wing has never engaged with Heimat. This is a concept that it would be completely new, these new proposals. What we find is that people across the board, across the political spectrum until the 1960s had used the concept. So as I began my research, just in the background of these bigger debates, I found that Heimat was not a taboo concept by any means. In fact, there was intense interest in Heimat because people had been so dislocated. Cities had been bombed, people had lost home. So it was really coming to the fore like never before. And it was more the locality rather than this national Heimat concept of National Socialism with which people were preoccupied. The second thing that was really surprising, given how Heimat in certain circles is associated with inherent far right-wing ideology, many were looking to Heimat to think about democracy. Nationalist thinking about Heimat had not disappeared, but it was not the only way of thinking about this, and several different groups argued for Heimat and home as an anti-nationalist and democratic, potentially democratic force. And here I look at three different areas. I won't go into too many details, but I look at the Rhineland, the German Southwest, and the Hanseatic cities on the coast. So these groups that I look at, what were their arguments for how you understand Heimat and home in a democratic way? One of the big arguments they made was federalist division. Right, you just come from a dictatorship. This idea we prevent a dictator coming from power by investing power in the regions. Sort of part of this was the argument that by taking political power to the regions and localities, you're putting everyday citizens in a place where they can have access to that power. Right, you can influence something taking place on the local or regional level. When it's centralized, everyday citizens get shut out. So it was a way of fostering participation in their minds. while nationalists had argued that Heimat was about forcing local energies and connecting them to the nation, many argued that by emphasizing the sovereignty and importance of the local and region, they could de-emphasize the nation, promote an idea of nation that was less national, right? And what I often found in my research was that they paired this with pro-European sentiments. So the idea was we focus on the locality and region, we focus on Europe, the nation, we still hold to national identity. Most of these people aren't separatists, but it's a less nation-focused nation, right? So really surprising for those who have said Heimat was this backward concept or was taboo. We see some other ways of thinking about it. So again, a lot of pro-European groups. And what was particularly interesting is how they turned to local and regional identities to engage with a new democratic system. And I was seeing this in all of the different locations that I found. One, many people started to argue for democracy as a local or regional tradition. They would pull on all kinds of historical memories, whether it was 1848 or Prussian anti-militarism, even some more anachronistic histories. This didn't make them suddenly democratic in practice, but it showed an aspiration to identify with something. But also fascinating was borderlands, regional narratives about identity in regional borderlands. Given most places in West Germany are borderlands, I don't want to say they're not representative because most of it is, and maritime cities, the Hanseatic cities, have a similar dynamic. But what I found was there was a switch after the war from an earlier narrativization of these places as natural fortresses, right? Where the Watch on the Rhine guarding against the French, we're the most German of German regions, or in the case of the Hanseatic cities on the coast, we are the nodes of German power. We project German power onto the global stage as in our function as harbor cities. After the war, there's this total inversion in many of these narratives, with many of these democratic groups who come out arguing that we're a bridge across the national border, not emphasizing the most fundamentally German histories, but saying we have influence from France and Switzerland, and we're not narrowly German. We are German, but right. So there was this switch in that narrativization, right? So you see both sides of this regionalism and localism question through these. So that was particularly fascinating. We also have this argument that among some who say you need to eliminate engagement with Heimat, that it's inherently exclusionary. And in West Germany, they had many outsider groups, first German expellees from the former Eastern regions. By the 1960s, you get immigrant groups, Italian, Greeks, then later Turkish immigrants. And it's not hard to find exclusionary ideas of Heimat. But this wasn't the only, I'll try and hurry. This wasn't the only way of thinking about that. I also looked at how others sought to combat these ideas by pulling on a differently understood idea of Heimat. They would argue that by reflecting on one's attachment to place, they could have empathy for those who lost their own, right? You should identify with you should reflect on your own feeling of home in a place, and that can help you understand how traumatic it is for a refugee, right? For example, others pulling to an idea of local tolerance as a value. And that was I could say a lot more about that, but I'll try and cut it down because of time. Right, so that it wasn't inherently, it could be exclusionary, but there were other ways of trying to think about this. So just closing really quickly, when do the ideas of Heimat as inherently reactionary and it needs to be eliminated from the language, when does that emerge? What I found in my research is it came at a moment of Cold War crisis, where we have these groups from the former East who lay claim to a right to the Heimat in the East. These are the lost regions that became part of Poland. Some sympathy for them in the 50s. By the 1960s, people are quite tired of it. And we also have huge Cold War crisis, right? And everyone realizes that you need to have a rapprochement with the Eastern Bloc. And this is going to mean giving up the Eastern German territories, at least semi-formally. So it's hugely explosive. So we have this Heimat concept comes to the middle of this Cold War crisis. And the political left develops two competing strategies for taking on this nationalist Heimat rhetoric in this Cold War battle. One is to say that the expellee nationalist understanding is the wrong understanding of Heimat. Nationalism is an abusive feeling of home. The other, taken up by many on the new left, is to say that wanting a place of Heimat is inherently fascist. Many rethink this position in the 1970s and 1980s. with many say, what does this mean in practice? You can say, I don't have home. I'm a global citizen. I don't have home. I don't have Heimat. But what does that mean in practice? Does that mean that places of personal experience inscribed in local places disappear? Does it mean that your ability to maintain relationships with people in your same hometown or wherever you find yourself, does that disappear? What about reform on a concrete level? So there's a lot of these questions about practice that come in that become problems. You know, you can transcend home in rhetoric, but it's not so easy when it comes to practice. I was planning on saying more about that, but I'm just wrapping up, and I will say, basically, I conclude my work with an unapologetic argument for engagement with home and Heimat. We can communicate globally, but we can't live globally. We can only live here or there. We can't live everywhere at once. And we can't disembark from places of personal experience. And if Heimat discourses now are any indication, the ability to stay near the place where one's friends, family, people that they have relationships with live continues to have meaning. And the fact that radical right groups seek to abuse these forces makes engagement more important, not less. So that's my big point, I guess. All right.
As we get through into questioning, but we will move swiftly on back online to Sofia. So if you want to start sharing your screen, Sofia.
I will try to do that. I practiced that, so I should be able to do that. Right.
There you go. We have it. Perfect.
You have it. You know, it's not really important. So if you don't have it, it's not a big loss. And can I just start by saying hello to the previous speaker, because I wrote the whole thesis about appreciation of German Heimat by the Soviet knowledge production, and I wrote a book about Reimagining, which is basically the German idea of Heimat transferred to the Soviet grounds. And I would really, really like to chat more about how the Putin regime actually works with the German ideas of Heimat right now. So, you know, I think we should catch up on that. And I will try to stick to the timing because it's quite late in Germany already, and I have a play date going somewhere there, you know. So if you hear kids screaming, do not, you know, don't feel bad about it. So I am working, so I work in the Leibniz Institute for Regional Geography, and here the word region stands for something which includes Eastern Europe, South Caucasus, but very, you know, very fragmented one. We don't include Azerbaijan, but Armenia and Georgia will do, and Central Asia. So I have been working for the last 4 years on the knowledge production and how the geographical knowledge production works both inside Russia right now. So the relationship with the between the Russian government and Russian Geographical Society and the publishing houses which publish educational materials and public geographical knowledge production. And I look at the strategies which are questioning Soviet legacy, the legacy, of the Soviet geographical knowledge production in the former Soviet states. So, and I look at that, I'm trying to understand whether and to which extent the colonial trends and the Soviet trends, which we're witnessing in this new nation identity formation, actually engage with the geographical knowledge production, specifically in public geographical knowledge production. And particularly, you know, right now we'll be talking about schools. So, and here I am interested in two aspects of that. So on one hand, we have very clear and very kind of understandable trend of reimagining the self, right? The state itself, recreating and rewriting national identity, spatial identity, rewriting who we are. But on the other hand, and this is something that it's less less clear, at least to me, is how do the former Soviet states develop independent knowledge about former Soviet space, about their neighbors, well, about Russia, you know, about the Soviet Union. So how do this cross-regional knowledge operates? And here's the story, you know, when I started to work in Georgia 4 years ago, I went to Ilya State University. It's one of the most prominent universities in Tbilisi to give a lecture. And I said, well, what do you want me to talk about? You know, I have 15 years of fieldwork experience in Russia, so I'm not quite, you know, I'm new to region. I don't know what I can share. And they say, and the answer was, we know nothing about Arctic. We literally have no idea what's happening in Russian Arctic. Can you tell us what's happening there? And that's how I get really curious about what is the contemporary knowledge, for example, in Georgia about Chukotka or Siberia, or what is the knowledge between, for example, Tajikistan and Georgia. So this kind of, and this is the project that I'm literally working on right now, which is spin-off of my project, which looks at the geographical knowledge production under Putin. And so, I mean, you know that we know it's, well, I should not be saying that to area studies people, but you know how, we all know how history and historical knowledge and memory about certain events being used in propaganda and in justification of the military actions and the wars, not only in the region that I'm working on, but also in other regions, right? But we know less about how geographical knowledge is used, or spatial history. You know, there are all these beautiful words we can talk about, and terms we can talk about, how that is used to justify aggression, or how it is used in current politics and geopolitics. And we quite often know it on the level of the internet memes, like Putin saying, well, the Russian borders don't end anywhere, or the Georgian government using, pro-European government using these maps of occupied territories by Russia, of Abkhazia and Tskhin Valley region to make their claims. But in fact, it goes, of course, the manipulation of geographical knowledge and the development of very specific spatial histories are, of course, deeper than that. And to be able to go into the core of what I'm looking at, we need to understand what was the Soviet geographical education, right? And here I will just touch upon this very briefly, because I think most of you know about that. But there was this major reform in 1934 when geography started to be one of, the main subject in schools, right? So there were guidelines written and rewritten of how geography should be taught. And it was a very centralized and very unified system that had maps and atlases in the core of the system. And if we go a bit deeper in the theory of map making and of critical map analysis, we know that the maps, they're these funny images who pretend to be scientific, but actually has this image of being, but has a lot of biases encoded in them. So they're very easy tools for manipulation. There was a really very particular focus on the spatial literacy and knowing where the things are and what are they called, so spatial literacy. The system was unified to a level that the textbooks that were issued in Moscow were sent all over the Soviet Union. And, you know, the image of what Russian winter was always the Central Russian winter, right? Nobody had rewritten them for Central Asia. They did have a special section of knowing your region, but that was really rare, and it depended on a republic to republic whether they would include it or not. And of course, that was part of this larger tendency of creating very specific myths and very specific images of peripheries, like sunny Georgia, virgin lands, and all of that beautiful myths and images that were imposed not on the region outside of Central Russia. And so, yeah, I'm interested in how those tendencies have been approached after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And I am focusing on 2 case studies on Georgia and Estonia. And I think I have got a sense that I will only have time to talk about Georgia today. So I'm, I'm trying to understand what have been the tendencies in questioning the Soviet system of the geographical education, both on institutional level and on the level of the knowledge production about the region. And so in Georgia, for those of you who are not really familiar with what's happening in Georgia, Georgia was one of the countries which has very strong the colonial narrative embedded in their post-Soviet national identity, right? So Russian Empire, Soviet Union have been portrayed as occupants, and this is the word which is used, right? Have colonized Georgia for centuries. And the attempts to create a distance to that, the attempts to create independence from anything, literally, which reminds on this on this heritage, is in the core of the post-Soviet Georgia national identity construction. And right now, since the beginning of the full-scale invasion to Ukraine in 2022, that's even a hotter topic because, first of all, of the great influence of Russian immigrants who literally collapsed the real estate markets and who really influenced the local and regional economy. But the second, as you might have heard of, because of the Russian government have chosen the path to actually turn back to Russia, not to the EU, and impose the anti-LGBT law and the law of the foreign agent. And in 3 weeks, there are elections, so we'll see what's going to happen. And this radical distance, this post-Soviet and post-colonial trends are really in core, are really kind of can be trickled down into the production of geographical knowledge in schools. So what happened, if we look in just, this is written in detail in the paper that I hope that you're going to see also in print soon. What happened in the system of education in Georgia is that as soon as Soviet Union collapsed, people from university who were engaging with the system of the school education, they immediately went to the West to learn how geography should taught. And there had been also waves and waves of developing completely new curriculum and textbooks. And so the distancing from the Soviet heritage and from the Soviet system of knowledge production can be seen, as I said, on all the levels. So first of all, I think it was on the previous site. Anyway, there is a market of the textbooks, so there is no unified approach to that. There is a market of the textbooks, and teachers and pupils are able to vote which textbook they want to use and which textbooks should be used in the school or on the local level. There is no really specific regional outline of the former Soviet space. So if you go into textbooks and curriculum, you have this regional division of the world, Europe, Asia. I think I've got it here on the pictures, right? But there is no former Soviet space. And so there is no kind of so my point here is that it's not only absent, but there is no counter-narrative which have been developed, right, to address the historical, geographical, economical, and political ties that still, I'm sorry, persist in the region, right? We can't just ignore them. And then, yes, and then there is this, so from the world and Europe and these big regions, we go on the national level, and there is section of the regional geographies of Georgia. But when you go and you talk with the teachers, and that's what I did in Tbilisi and Gori, they are confused, right? And then we came across this level of uncertainty when from one hand, there are teachers who are going to the international conference and say, well, we use Google Maps and we're able to address the resources written in different languages. And so we're quite well set. There are teachers who are completely in denial in saying we don't teach any geography of Russia or of the former Soviet Union because we have no idea what to say.
2 minutes.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. And then they say something like, well, we need to say something about the region. So we use the Soviet textbooks to teach about what is the post-Soviet space here. And I will just keep Estonia. I'll just say that the relationship with the political discourse there and with the colonial discourse there is different. I'm sorry, that's also work in progress. So I'm still working on that. But here we have the region. You can see it on the maps from the school atlases. So we do have this image of the former Soviet region, which you would never encounter in the Georgian textbooks, for example. So very briefly, so what I wanted to say is that the construction of the new post-Soviet nationalized geographies are intertwined sometimes with the decolonial and desovietization trends that we see in history and in politics. And my point is that it goes beyond just repositioning of the country and of the South, but actually of it should be, sorry, I know I sound not very academic right now, but I'm questioning whether it should also be engaging with the development of the new narrative about this space, which goes beyond just saying, oh, Russia is this, gray enemy, which we're not talking about. And unfortunately, that's what I see as lacking right now. So cross-peripheral and cross-regional, if we're questioning the Russian integrity as a state, knowledge production is not really developing and not really developing as a part of the colonization discourse. And I will stop here. Thank you very much for giving me the floor.
Thank you, Sofia. Brilliant. Thank you very much to all speakers for your papers, for keeping to time, for giving us such a cornucopia of delights. And now we do have time for questions, but also for conversation, because we've had papers that go from the local to the geopolitical, the colonial, post-colonial in different regions. So I think they're also interesting things for us to discuss and share. So if you're online and you want to ask a question, then do the put your hand up thing or put your camera on. I will keep checking, but also I'll look, of course, in the room and see who might want to ask questions. Francis. What? Oh, the microphone. Here we go.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. Very interesting set of papers indeed. I really want to sort of bring together the themes that Jakub was coming out with the themes that Sofia were coming out with in relation to Georgia in particular, because there I think the question of the region needs to be if you like, at the centre of attention, and it's the one thing which, if you like, the Western-oriented politicians who've held sway in Georgia until very recently have tended, probably to their great peril, to ignore. If you look at the maps of Georgia that Sofia was showing, it's got three large neighbours. It's got Russia to the north, it's got Turkey to the southwest, it's got Iran to the southeast. And I'm wondering whether, if you like, in any of the discourse that's developing in Georgia or more widely in the region, there is any recognition of the fact that with neighbours like that, really trying to ally yourself with a power that is thousands of miles away and has probably a somewhat instrumental attitude towards you, your geographical position and your national interests, might not be the wisest thing you can possibly do.
Nice difficult question from Francis. Jakub, do you want to respond and then I'll come to Sofia?
Okay, or maybe Sofia.
Well, if you start, I think Sophia's not visible at the moment, so you go ahead.
Okay. Okay. Oh,
I am.
Cheers.
I'm visible.
Sofia, why don't you start and then Jakub, you can pick it up, yeah?
It's a very good question. And I think, you know, in the interviews that I was doing about the region in Georgia for the last 4 years, you always come down to this conversation, well, it's better be Russians than the Muslims. So, I mean, this, what you're saying, this juxtaposition of well, in particular of Georgia, you know, it's this victim narrative of a small country, but it's not me who said that. So, you know, I can don't quote me on that, but there are people who wrote on that, of a rather small territory, which is somehow positioned between, as you say, you know, historically 2 or 3 big empires, who needs to kind of navigate that, right? And I think if we go to the, well, as I said, from my experience and from the interviews that I did, it's quite interesting to think about this region, because the ties in between 3 republics in South Caucasus are very weak, right? Because of the history of how the Armenian-Georgian relationships, and with Azerbaijan also being a Muslim country, there is no kind of a force that will form the region, right, which will hold the South Caucasus together. And this is what, for example, all the EU institutions were doing for last 10 years at least, right? The Swiss Cultural Fund, the Goethe Institute, they were all investing money in one thing. Well, in many things, but in particular, in gluing the region together, in bringing the artists together, right? In creating dialogue between Armenian experience and Georgian experience. But it doesn't look sustainable right now. So I'm not sure that these ties are really solid. I'm not sure if I've answered the question, but
No, you helped us understand the implications of the question. Maybe Jakub, do you want to pick up here?
I think it is a very crucial question, because I also wanted to ask Sofia the question, okay, if not post-Soviet area, what kind of term we could use? And we could analyze this also in the 2 contexts, in the context of schools, professors, because and also in practice, in reality, in politics, how, for example, great powers perceive this area, South Caucasus, and how they promote this. And even if we take into account schools, universities, also we have still a lot of places where we have post-Soviet area studies. It's also in Poland. It is the discussion how we should call this area. And it is a big discussion in Poland, because if you focus on Central Europe, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia. So what is the name of this studies teaching program? It is Central Europe MA program, for example. And it is one thing. It is still. I think it is a little problem, especially in Poland and Central Europe, among the scholars who really focus on this region area, because we have different scholars, mostly scholars who are more connected with domestic issues, political science, and they don't perceive this area as a region in Aryal. It is a little problem. They try to analyze this region in the context of cultural aspects, languages, and I think we are victim of this, because we should follow Chinese scholars and how China perceives, for example, Central Europe. 20 years ago, when China decided and the Chinese scholars started to recognize Central Europe as something separate from Eastern Europe. And they started have a lot of programs in School of Aryal at Peking University. We have Central Europe unit. So it is even at our university, at our faculty, it is a discussion because we have, for example, with Saroj, we have, for example, MA program in Asia Studies. We have MA program in Area and Global Studies, and separately is MA in post-Soviet studies. So de facto, if we have such approach, we recognize what Putin wants, because he said, okay, it is post-Soviet, but it is connected with one fact Sofia didn't say, that 80% of scholars connected with post-Soviet studies in Central Europe were they had, especially over 60s, 70s, they had a big nostalgia to this area. It is a main problem. So it is one, and very quickly about geopolitics and the great power. So what we could do it in practice, I think I'm not expert on this, so it is more question to Sofia, but big powers, United States, but European Union they should underline the new term, South Caucasus, or they should promote Black Sea region, for example. We should promote the new terminology, the new terms by United States, by European Union, and started to stop use post-Soviet terminology. It is the same. We could use how United States solved the problem with Asia Pacific and China. Started to use the term Indo-Pacific. And it is so. It depends a little on us.
Thank you. Sofia, I see you wanted to come back in. Just respond quickly.
Yes, sure. I will just respond to that very quickly. So there is the whole debate happening in the area studies, which is Slavic, former East, post-Soviet European studies, of how we redefine ourselves. So I just want to say that when we use, and really, like literally, all the last 5 conferences, like BASIS, ACES, the Alexandria, the major panels, how do we redefine the region, right? And how do we listen to the republics and what do they say in the way, the terms they use to address specific periods in the post-Soviet history, right? To address what's happened, the region. And there is a lot of written about that. And I'm using the word post. So I'm using, there was, when I started, working on the topic, that we used to stick to the word, what was it? Republics in transition. There was this, idea of transition from the socialistic past to something else. Then we dropped it. But what I'm trying to say, that post-Soviet is not only about space, it's about very specific time in history. And I don't take it for granted, right? So I'm not saying that there is a specific term post-Soviet that we're using to address the region. No, I'm saying that it's a great debate about that. And thank you for pointing it out.
Thank you, Sofia. I'm going to move now to Susan.
Yeah, I'd like to say thank you to all of our speakers who have raised some really interesting questions. And I think that these questions speak to the formation of our new research centre. And our new research centre, the title of this is New Area Studies. And what we mean by that is an area studies that isn't defined or divided or imagined even as simply one region, but that area itself, that new area studies, has to be taken out of the disciplinary boundaries and constraints that we've all accepted that have been in place since the Cold War and before, and were used by some disciplines to their own advantage, I suppose. And that we need to think about, if you think about it, I mean, it goes back a little bit to what Jeremy was talking about when he was talking about, you know, home, the local. What the very first paper this morning was about, the micro, in terms of, can we have a micro area studies? I know that not everybody heard that paper, but the idea was, I don't know, Sarah's here, but the idea being that can we make area studies very personal, relating and to the advantage of the person in place in the locality, and that new area studies should sort of disabuse, should ignore, if you like, the boundaries of the previous disciplines, become post-disciplinary to a certain extent, and think about the relationships between people in place, and be less concerned with the structures which divide us within those places and maps, if you like. So for those of you who maybe don't know about some of the ideas that we have been putting forward in new area studies, I encourage you to look at our online journal, particularly the first volume of that, which was released in 2020, and to see some of the ideas that we have about that, which is to actually to understand what it's like to be in place, to live in place. We need all kinds of information, from hard data, the science on health and well-being, non-populations, etc., right across to the micro. So I think maybe by taking the notion of new area studies, you can bypass some of these older arguments about what is area studies or how do we define our space, etc., etc. So that's just some comment to think about. So someone might.
Thank you for 4 really interesting papers. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So regions are all important now. It seems to me it's something I've been really fascinated with for the last certainly decade, and you know, have published on and so forth. I just wanted to mention, because if Sofia's still here, I wanted to get some more of her input. Last spring, I ran a symposium, a couple days symposium on thinking about the Black Sea as a region, which other people have been doing too, but we were doing it through the lens of the arts, literature, particularly, but also sculpture, film, and the rest. And the question was focusing on the Black Sea, which is certainly a troubled region in its own way, even though it seems like no one's talking to each other, and it's just kind of, it's the what did they call it? The Ottoman pond at some point, and then it was the Soviet pond, and then Khrushchev tried to build a kind of a Soviet leisure area type of thing. But we were asking, are there at least common themes? Do any of these literatures or cultures interact with each other? Do they talk to each other? I mean, it's not dissimilar to this conversation here. And it was quite distressing. They have their own pieces. You know, the Bulgarians have disagreed with the Romanians over terrain. Everybody's had terrain problems. And nobody really embraces the Black Sea as this incredible resource that we all share. And thinking about that. And I found with Georgians, there was a special kind of, we're separate, and sort of victim narrative too, that it seems to me has to be addressed in some way. Just making your own geography and ignoring your just isn't going to work in the power world, because nature hates a vacuum, and so does politics. And a couple of pieces of hope, but just during the Russia's war against Ukraine, there have been Ukrainian Georgian sort of translation projects and things like that that are going on that, you know, this is a very teeny small toe in the water, but it's something that could be built on, and that's a very good thing. Thank you.
Thank you. So I do want to know your answer to that, Sophia, on the Black Sea. But before that, I want to bring in Jeremy partly to respond to what Susan has said there about what area studies is, but also your take on these other kind of talks, how your approach to kind of Heimat and that sort of experience of locality, does that articulate at all with this very high level kind of conversation about regions and so forth?
Sorry, do you want me to start?
Oh, sorry, no.
No, okay, yeah, okay.
Sorry, we're just going to, Jeremy's just speaking from anyone but
Okay,
here.
sorry about that. Yeah, no, I think there are connections, and that's really what I look at. I mean, Heimat, the question about how you understand Heimat, it's everything in your experienced environment, but people are constantly articulating what that means with the broader world. How do you relate it to the nation? How do you relate it to, I mean, if you think in terms of foreign policy, I mean, you have border regionalists celebrating on the border after the war saying we have connections across our border and we have our Heimat days and we're pro-European, right? So, I mean, I think it does connect to how you relate to broader places within the world. You know, my study on the Hanseatic cities, I mean, how do they understand their role as a coastal city and this experiential space and its relation to the world? Yeah, that sort of micro is very much and shaping identity vis-a-vis bigger global regions. I mean, you can see that in there, or blocking yourself out and rejecting connection to those global regions. You can have both options. So that's a connection, I think.
Thank you very much. And Saroj, can I turn to you as well to comment on the discussion kind of so far?
Can I have a question to Saroj?
Oh, yes, okay. Yeah, but we have a question for you from Jakub. You can answer, yeah?
Usually we have plenty of time in Warsaw, but to discuss. But I have a question to Saroj about your presentation, because you put stress on colonialism, post-colonialism. You talk about nationalism, and my question is in the context of Aryal, how you perceive South Asia. It is more as a cultural, political concept, or more in the context of concept of Aryal? It is the first question. And the second question, it's now a huge debate in the context of Asia Pacific, Indo-Pacific, and how is your opinion and maybe discourse in South Asia, if you could tell about discourse in South Asia among Aryal scholars, political science scholars, but also scholars who focus on area studies. It's what is the argument is in favor of Asia Pacific, and what kind of arguments, ontological, epistemological arguments in the context of Indo-Pacific, and how you locate South Asia more as a sub-region of Asia Pacific or Indo-Pacific. So 2 questions. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Saroj?
Thank you so much, Professor. So yeah, the first question is quite interesting, and I might sound a little bit strong in the sense that South Asia for me was never a cultural area, because it's always is, especially after the independence, it has been a very, very core study area of international relations for a few reasons. One reason, South Asia, when we talk about South Asia, we always say South Asia as a diverse region. So when we talk about diverse region, there's a differences in culture, differences in religion. It's more of a dividing factor rather than a combining or bringing together factor for South Asia. We have a plenty of example of India, Pakistan. We have an example of Bangladesh, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan. We also have an example of Afghanistan and Pakistan. And in many instances, despite being Hindu nation, predominantly similar sort of people, Nepal and India also have many dividing cultural factors. So for that reason, Professor, my personal assessment would be South Asia is always some sort of region that can only be precisely studied through the lens of international relations because of the great power of politics, because of the rising profile of India. So Stephen Cohen have done quite a lot of work on regional studies from Eye of India for South Asia. So for that reason, South Asia for me is an international relations region. And me being a citizen of Nepal, on your second question, that whether a South Asian states would like to associate themselves with the Asia Pacific or Indo-Pacific, 100%, 200% Indo-Pacific, and for only one reason. The reason is, for instance, Nepal. If they keep associating themselves with the Asia Pacific region, that is no identical for region. They don't have anything to do with Asia Pacific. But lately in American Indo-Pacific strategy, they have accommodated Nepal, Afghanistan in there. Despite Nepal is a landlocked country, they are a part of Indo-Pacific strategy for US. So this is also a matter of identity. Nepal have opportunity to go beyond South Asia, go beyond that shadow of India that has been going on for a very long time. So all of the South Asian states, including Pakistan, including Bangladesh, including Nepal, have or would like to associate themselves with Indo-Pacific. Considering Pakistan is one of the closest ally of China these days, all of the Pakistani scholars also are referring or using this terminology Indo-Pacific rather than Asia-Pacific. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Saroj. And I want to come back to Sofia to pick up this very interesting question about the Black Sea, but also if you want to speak to these larger issues in play about how we're conceptualizing regions and movements and people's relations to the places that they are in.
Well, I don't have a lot to say, I'm afraid, about that. I mean, there's a lot of rewriting, let me say it that way, of the region coming from exactly, trying to put the Black Sea in the center, which from my research in the field, doesn't feel really very natural. Right, and we're trying to listen to what people on the ground say. There are ties between Georgia and Turkey happening on the level of rewriting of the history, addressing the trauma, and recreating the region's identity. There are relationships between contemporary artists, as I said, between Armenia and Georgia, that are kind of imposed by the Western policies. But I think there is a very big difference in the regions of how we recreate the region, and how we use historical, political, and economical ties to rewrite it. And for what is happening on the ground, I remember I had a really long talk and interview with one of the Uzbek curator, contemporary artist, very prominent one, who told me, yeah, but we feel like the whole post-colonial discourse is really imposed on us, So there are artists who are creating the beautiful post-colonial arts, and we don't take them seriously because we see them as the agents of, pro-Western discourse, and we're looking at something else. So I am not sure I'm the best person to really be quick and gathering it all together right now. But I really think that, for example, for me, what is lacking and what I'm trying to kind of look at is the relationship between, for example, the activists in Buryatia or in Sakha region in Russia and Georgian activists, right? Because they're very similar in what they're saying, but they don't know about each other, right? Because quite often Russia is just this, as I said, Russia is this evil gray, and there is no need to try to understand what's happening inside. And sometimes there are interesting things still happening inside.
Thank you, Sofia. I'm going to draw things to a close. Our hour and a half is up, and I know that the longer I talk, the more I'm keeping you from your drinks reception. But I'll just thank all four of you for your wonderful presentations and papers. That's given me more to think about than I had possibly thought was possible. So thank you very much. Please thank our speakers.
Thank you so much. Thank